Dreamcast. In the past, you may have noticed that I've expressed almost as much love for consoles as I have for games. It only really makes sense though. We remember just as many things about games as we do the consoles, and that's because they've played huge roles historically, both in terms of the companies themselves and the impact they had on us as kids. The amount of work put into one really did determine how successful it was. Hardware determined software, and if the hardware was shit, the games would suffer. If the hardware was good, then the games were usually bound to be good, at least in some regard. More than just toys or playthings, consoles marked huge milestones in technological development and made sure to showcase what the world was working with at the time on a commercial level. While we would simultaneously see arcade cabinets that packed much more horsepower, even those developers found themselves working towards the home, the sweet, widespread release. Inevitably, this led to what we now famously call the console wars. I mean, could you believe it? This shit got fucking political in the most classical sense possible. Companies like Nintendo, Sega, and even Sony making huge campaigns telling you why they were the best candidate and why you need to buy this thing and slap it in front of your TV. These are the polygons you so desire, kid. Now, before 2006 and the advent of more standardized technology, this was actually pretty warranted, given that nearly every console had its own share of exclusives, features, support, and varying different types of hardware. Certain consoles simply couldn't support other consoles' games given the wildly different architectures. Nowadays, that problem still exists, perhaps, but it's nowhere near as hindering or dividing as it was in the days of wacky names and crazy colors on tiny plastic boxes, a time where there were far more than 3 competitors. There are countless industry stories that spawned from these wars and innumerable would-bes and what-ifs that were all lost to time. One of the most enigmatic and tragic stories, and the one that is my personal favorite, is that of the Sega Dreamcast. Of all the different consoles, both failed and successful, Sega's Dreamcast is one of the most beloved and respected. Not as a grandfather or parents like the NES or the PlayStation, but it's more like the failed artist, who was only respected eons after they lived. The Dreamcast harbors a giant community, who to this day remain completely enthusiastic and supportive of this tragic hero. The Dreamcast was perfectly named. It was but a dream, a shining glimmer of hope, and sometimes it almost feels like it never happened. But, you know, it totally did. Released in the weird, untimely period after the PlayStation and Nintendo 64, and before the PS2 and GameCube and Xbox, the Dreamcast was out for blood. Packing a serious punch never before seen in the home, the system boasted Sega's return from the dead zone following the death of the Genesis, its life support systems, and the Saturn. Sega was more or less down and out, and they decided they needed something big. They needed to kick ass again, and boy did they. I mean, let's talk about this thing for a second.
Let's get scratching.
At its core, this thing looks pretty basic, and it's pretty perfectly to the point, right? You got your disc tray, a nice tiny square shape, and 2 dandy little buttons. Even the logo itself tickles my fancy. It's also pretty hefty. There's definitely something going on in here. This thing is stocky. Alright, enough fucking around. Let's flip this thing around so we can highlight the most shocking part of this whole deal. Check this shit out. Modem. The Sega fucking Dreamcast shipped with a goddamn modem on it. Well, why the fuck is this important? Well, how about the fact that the Dreamcast was the first? Yeah, when the Dreamcast was released, Sega had been pushing for online connectivity hard, and had gone on record multiple times stating that the internet was the future of gaming. Now, whether or not they were just spitballing or trying to pull a whole modern VR futuristic thing, we all kinda know that they were right as fuck. The Dreamcast in its heyday let you go online, go on IRC chats to talk about things, go on Quake 3 Arena, and even get downloadable content. Yeah, 1999 DLC right on board, and all of it was for free, bitch! This is one of the bigger points that a lot of people point to when they say the Dreamcast was tragically ahead of its time. You hooked this thing up to your phone line, you were jacked directly into the Matrix, and you were the one. One more thing, VGA output. VG fucking A output means that these games looked fucking beautiful, even by today's standards. Alright, let's look at... What? What the fuck? Okay, listen, this controller is actually kinda dope. It has a few interesting aspects that at least make it stand out, and you can clearly see that Sega was trying to make something new. It's not my favorite, but I certainly dig it at least. We got this giant analog stick which doesn't have any preset angles on the outside, even though it does have very light snap points on the inside somewhere, a D-pad right under it, and on the right we have our standard face buttons in the same exact layout as the Xbox would have. The handles are a little strange. They kinda angle straight up or maybe even a little outwards, which means you'll have to get kinda used to holding it. After a while, it's not really an issue, however. Then we have our two analog triggers at the back. Pretty standard fare, but again, a nice touch. Okay, so elephant in the room, what the fuck is that? It's a screen, maybe? Nope, that thing comes right out and it's what's known as a VMU. That is Visual Memory Unit. Oh yeah, this thing is your fucking memory card, and it's fucking sick. The idea was pretty basic but powerful. Snap this thing in your controller, it's a memory card, you save your progress, and during gameplay you'll actually see related little screens pop up. Not super useful, but I mean fuck it, that shit is fun to look at every so often. The bigger deal is what happens when you take it out. Depending on the games you have saved, you can actually interact with it or play games on it when it's out of the controller. I've never really done that because, you know, why? But it's just yet another far-reaching idea that shows the extents Sega was looking at to get a step ahead. Also, it's an Xbox controller before the Xbox. The Dreamcast, as short-lived as it may have been, is the cult favorite console, and as such is home to some serious cult hits, which is basically the perfect formula for sucking me right the fuck into orbit. At first, I thought about talking about a single game or something, but I almost instantly came to the realization that I found the topic of the console itself far more interesting. So let's check out some fucking games already, homie. Oh man, this intro. You do not see these anymore. So soothing, like a gentle breeze. Crazy Taxi's fucking insane! Of course Crazy Taxi! Are you kidding? Crazy Taxi is an almost universally known classic both in the arcades and the home, and the Dreamcast port remains as one of its more popular titles. The game sees us going absolutely batshit insane in a taxi as one of 4 characters through a fictional town/city as we have to go around collecting blocky little passengers and take them to places like the church, the station, KFC, Pizza Hut, Tower Records. Wow, way to date yourself on that one. The original Levi's store. So, also, this game is a relic of an early 2000s commercial, but who cares? The gameplay is as simple as can be. Hold the right trigger and go. It controls pretty funky, but once you get the hang of it, you start to really get into it. You get into this, like, tunnel vision mode that sucks you in, and all of a sudden you're locked on the screen as you scramble to pick up more passengers to keep your game time up and to get the most money. The faster you get your passenger to get their bucket of chicken, the more money you rack up. All while jamming to the serious garage butt rock of the era. I mean, who is this song even fucking by? Crazy Taxi in 2016 would probably work in the hypothetical circumstance of a fresh IP, only as a mobile game. However, I think its charm really does come a lot from the whole coming home from school, jamming the disc in, sitting down and melting your brain out through your ears while avoiding your earth science project type of deal. Not to say that doesn't still exist, but Crazy Taxi, in my honest opinion, was very much created exactly in the right era. The game itself completely disregards all logical sense of physics and, you know, safety. There's a few cute little details that really make it enjoyable too. The passengers are all based on simple archetypes, and all have their own voice clips that sound like they were all lovingly recorded in a day.
Come on, get it.
Thanks! That was too dangerous! Careful!
Hey, watch it, you idiot! Would you keep your eye on the road?
I love how this rocker dude just rocks out while running to and from the taxi. They'll even stand up and shout at you from the back seat. Overall, it's just a really good time. Rather than putting any sort of emphasis on story or believability, the game allows you to just completely lose your shit with little to no consequence. Unless you consider losing a few dollars a huge tragedy. Oh shit, I didn't mean to... Oh, it's fine. You can let this game set the theme for the rest of the games on this console. As I said, the Dreamcast is home to many, if not exclusively cult classics, and almost all of them are still openly spoken about today. One of the other big hitters for Dreamcast looked up to in this regard is Jet Set Radio. Or, yeah, Jet Grind Radio, if you're a dirty American such as myself.
The music just turns me on. Funky rhythm coming at ya.
Yet yet another cult classic and an absolute fan favorite, many cite Jet Set Radio as the first and best of its kind. With the art style, music, gameplay, and overall design, who can really disagree either? Fuck, that's not what I meant. Shit! Jet Set combines the punky, skateboarding-fueled rebellion from Tony Hawk's Pro Skater and mixes it with hardcore rollerblading wall-tagging action and wraps the whole thing up in a dystopian city and police brutality. Did you just fucking shoot me for vandalizing? The game puts us in the shoes, rollerblades, fucking whatever, of cool, edgy teens and has us going around this weird city that's been overrun with police and rival gangs. I feel like I've talked about this before. Your job basically is to go around the whole place and tag as much shit as humanly possible by way of the left trigger and analog stick QTEs, which are charmingly tricky to pull off the first few times. We get to collect spray bottles, avoid officers, and do some fancy schmancy tricks. The controls in the game are pretty solid, even though I do find myself sorta fidgeting at times. Like everything else I played on the Dreamcast, it's just something you gotta get used to. It doesn't help that my controller's analog stick is kind of fucking just not... Well, regardless, Jet Set's gameplay can get pretty addictive at times, especially when you try to have a more steady flow of play. Grinding and jumping into tricks and tags feels pretty satisfying and empowering, making whatever control issues you might have kinda not worth even complaining about since they quickly fade into oops as you progress further in the game. The designs and art style were also somewhat groundbreaking as the cell shading effect hadn't really yet been done or even possible on previous consoles where lighting was more or less reduced to some polygons looking brighter than others. Now we had intricate systems with actual shadows that showed off what new technology was capable of. Elaborating more on the Tony Hawk inspiration, the world you play in ends up being super interactive and filled with a lot of opportunities and possibilities and feels open-ended. No linear paths or levels, just doing the most you can in a certain area. The character designs all follow this zany mid-2000s spin on the future and all follow stranger human proportions but don't actually feel too outdated. The overall cyber-y, steamish punk mix of styles means the game has a lot of style and charm to it. Oh, also, it was partly developed by Sonic Team, which was neat. Wait, that reminds me of something. Well, I can't remember. I can't say I'm a die-hard fan for it, but playing it today, I can definitely see the appeal. It's also praised by many for having a very strange, alternative soundtrack. The songs used very heavily match the general tone of the game, much in the same way Tony Hawk's songs did in those games, as I've noticed that people who talk about either of these games mention the gameplay nearly as much as they do the soundtracks. There was clear effort put into not just making standard filler background music, but a more genuine experience for the player, and its fame can be rooted back largely in part to this aspect. That's really what the Dreamcast developers had in mind. Genuine, authentic experiences. Games with soul. While Jet Set had lots of love put into it, no other Dreamcast game had more soul, love, and heart than a game called Shenmue. Now I saved this one for last. This right here, this is the big one. This game alone sold the Dreamcast, and for very good reason. If you ever wanted to see what the Dreamcast can really do, then look no further. Anywhere you look on the internet, you'll see this game be linked synonymously with the name Dreamcast. However, I think it's time this got an explanation, since everywhere I look, I always see this vague description. Shenmue is very much a stop and smell the roses type of game. It's also a crazy QTE action game. It also has Tekken, I guess? It's a lot. We begin with Ryo Hazuki, who rushes home to find his house rummaged and his father in an intense battle with some asshole named Lan Di. Ryo attempts to stop Lan Di, but it's too late. He steals the thing and straight up kills his father with a lethal karate move right in front of Ryo. Right in this intro sequence, we can see a few shocking aspects of the game's engine. The facial models and textures are beyond anything anyone had seen at that point. We can see where Ryo is looking, we can see his mouth move and his face morph. Crude now, totally, but given that this was what preceded, this was simply astounding. The animations and details made this title stand out not only to the Dreamcast audience, but attracted universal acclaim. It doesn't just end there though. The game sought to create an entire world, and they didn't really fail at that either. As we gained control of Ryo, we have a very telling control scheme. Instead of moving with the analog stick, we have the D-pad. The analog stick is actually literally just dedicated to moving your head around. Using the left trigger to zoom into objects, we find that we can actually open up and look at nearly every cupboard, every object, and view just everything up close. Nearly everything in Ryo's house alone is accounted for. It took me nearly 30 minutes just to get through it all. Once you realize you can do this, and once you realize you're about to get sucked into a void like this, it's really a silent moment of, oh no. Exploring out into the neighborhoods and seeing all the different little nooks and crannies that you can approach, it really begins to dawn on you just what kind of game this is. Big. I must have said that 1,000 times about a lot of titles, but seriously, this game is probably the biggest one I've ever actually talked about. The game just up and throws us into the world, and we have to set ourselves on a journey to find the dude who killed our dad. And this involves gathering clues from citizens, venturing into weird nightclubs, running into freaks, fighting some dudes, being quick on your toes with QTE segments, dialing phones, examining various fruits, getting a job, and forklifts. Every person has their own dialogue.
Hi, Ryo. I heard about your father. I'm sorry. Have one of my special dogs. It'll perk you up, I bet.
I'll have one next time.
Regardless of the questionable voice acting, every person in this game is actually fully voice acting, which, again, was completely unheard of. It is very easy to miss stuff in this game. The game itself goes for a completely realistic art style, taking a lot from 80s era urban-ish Japanese culture. I mean, that mullet, those jeans, and the towns themselves all feel way more authentic in nature. I found myself likening the game style a lot to Neon Genesis Evangelion, my favorite anime ever, even though that technically was post-apocalyptic Tokyo. They both have that sort of duality between the quiet, somber moments and the zany, chaotic action moments, as opposed to some hyperactive schoolgirl anime bastardization. It all makes it feel like a journey through a real, actual place. One of the funnier aspects of the game are all the weird little Sega references that pop up pretty often, like the little Sonic and Tails figurines, the Virtual Fighter poster, the Sega Saturn. Yeesh. You guys really want to bring that up again? Shenmue's success and admiration probably come more from the broad story, the meticulous attention to detail, the stunning amounts of interactivity, and the general feel. It's certainly more of an experience on the experimental side. It reminds me a lot of the experimental indie titles that are spread about on the PC nowadays. Beyond anything, Shenmue simply demands a bit of time and effort. If you can really give it a sit down, you'll most likely unlock what is potentially one of the most engaging game experiences. Where other and older games had more set pieces meant purely to fill the gaps or set the scene, Shenmue filled the crevices quite a bit and really tried to make the world an actual place as opposed to leaving most things simply to imagination. A seriously underrated classic on an underrated console. This game and the ones I've talked about only really scratched the surface of this iceberg. There is a surprisingly large amount of games on the Dreamcast that are still worth a play. Ones that I didn't fully talk about, like I feel like there's a certain something I'm forgetting here. Oh yeah, Space Channel 5 for example. Space Channel 5 is a music rhythm game that immediately lets you know what you're getting into. It's like you can kind of smell it down the hall, but you open that apartment door and whoop, I am smelling what you are cooking, friend. And I don't mind taking a dish. It's not a crazy giant game, but it definitely has a whole personality and character of its own. Like most Dreamcast games, it's heavily influenced by Japanese culture, as most of it looks like a strangely elaborate J-pop video or performance. The whole game is based on the premise of fighting aliens by dancing on beat. Which sounds pretty simple until you get into the more complex rhythms and you realize how grueling it feels to lose at such a game. I don't have too much to say about this one, although I can recognize its significance as one of the bigger flagship titles for the console. There was also Sega Rally 2, yet another arcade classic that saw home release, and boy, nothing feels more stressful than having to get to the next checkpoint before you run out of time. I do have to say real quick that this game has some nice driving physics. It's kinda slidey, but I like it. Making turns puts you into a drift like immediately. This is kinda how I play Mario Kart anyways, so I'm right at home. This is also one of the only retro games I've played that adopted the analog trigger gas pedal rather than just pressing A, something that I thought only popped up during the 7th generation. The cars also get dirt on them after racing through mud, which is a neat little detail. I thought that was nice. Moving on, the Dreamcast had one other niche aspect which it was hailed for, and that's its expansive library of fighting games. Definitive ports of arcade fighting games like Street Fighter, Marvel vs. Capcom, and my personal favorite, Soul Calibur. Soul Calibur really hits that sweet spot between accessibility and combat depth, much in the vein of Super Smash Bros. Speaking of which, this game actually features Yoshimitsu from Tekken. Neat! Originally an arcade port, Soul Calibur was ported only to the Dreamcast with better graphics and features, with Xbox Live Arcade and mobile ports coming nearly a decade later. As mentioned before, this fighting game is a bit different in that it's far easier for someone to pick it up and fight, while more experienced players can use familiar advanced techniques from the likes of games like Tekken. I originally only played Soul Calibur 2 on the GameCube, but the differences in actual fighting mechanics are marginal, so it still manages to hold up really well even today. Just yet another example of the power hidden in the Dreamcast's interior. I could rave about this console for quite a while, and I've shown you just an inkling of what it has to offer. Phantasy Star Online, Unreal Tournament, Choo Choo Rocket, fucking Seaman even. The list is nearly endless, although I feel like my memory's fuzzy on one or two titles. So what happened? Well, Sega's best, simply put, wasn't good enough. The console suffered from a few major fundamental flaws which ultimately led to its complete and utter downfall. Here's where the tragic part comes in that I was hinting at. The Dreamcast fell victim to shitty timing, more or less. By the end of 2000, not only was it being beaten out by the original PlayStation, but Sony had already started building up some gnarly press attention for the PlayStation 2, as it was touted to be more powerful and was going to have a lot more major developers. In fact, EA had completely pulled out of the Dreamcast from the start. Sega had to team up with Visual Concepts to develop NFL 2K, which was actually almost universally accepted as being the superior product. So who did EA go to? Well, take a wild guess. Again, politics. Dreamcast had the games, but perhaps not so much so the attention or major support. For as much as Sega had innovated, Sony was quickly becoming the modern gaming behemoth that we know them as now. Couple that with the fact that the rise of the web, the one thing the Dreamcast was advocating more than anything, meant that piracy had began to take a massive toll on the console. The Dreamcast GD-ROM was decided on over the DVD-ROM on grounds that it would be more secure. Instead, the GD-ROM was probably the easiest platform to pirate in history, and required nothing more than a CD-ROM and a disk image. This meant that anyone with an internet connection could potentially not pay a dime on Dreamcast purchases. With Sega quickly running out of money and rumors that Microsoft, who developed Windows CE as it appears on the Dreamcast itself, was about to enter the business as well, Sega really had no options. So, they finally left the hardware business. The Dreamcast wasn't just a console, it represented one last futile hope, the underdog, an image I know all too well. It was far from one last-ditch effort, it was a final beam of light shooting to the stars. Again, very aptly named. All of the games and hype and ideas behind the console were very much of a dreamlike quality. Fantastic dimensions of 80s Japan, a dystopian future, dancing aliens, and stories left completely untold. I mean, who knows? What if the Dreamcast had come out earlier? What if Sega's reputation wasn't already tarnished by poor decision-making? It's a story lost to time, but the dream doesn't end there. Go anywhere, on any forum, and you're bound to find Dreamcast enthusiasts from all around. Like I mentioned earlier, there are entire communities dedicated hardcore to the console and its games. Going on YouTube and searching up anything regarding Shenmue or its sequel will net you tons and tons of people who love this game. In fact, I want you to listen to this announcement.
But we wanted to celebrate their announcement on our stage, since this is a game that PlayStation fans have been very vocal about.
Fuck yeah!
Fucking kidding me?
When Shenmue 3 was announced, not only did the internet collectively lose its shit, me included, but it literally fucking broke Kickstarter. As in, the popular modern website Kickstarter was completely non-functional for a very brief period. Most or all of those people were part of the Dreamcast fandom. If you want to find out more about the Dreamcast, I highly recommend you go check out a man by the name of Adam Korlick. You can find his channel right over here. I'm not affiliated with him in any way, I've simply been a fan of his since seeing all his Dreamcast videos so long ago. And he's still at it, too. He's done numerous informative videos on the subject and is probably the reason why I even care about the Dreamcast. And he's a gigantic Shenmue enthusiast. In fact, as I mentioned earlier, the footage you're seeing of all these wonderful games is taken directly from a console at the highest output quality available. Run through a VGA box and upscaled to 1080p thanks to this box thing, so I could record it all in full resolution and so I can show you guys the games as they were meant to be played. Don't get anything I just said? You know where to go. Thanks, Adam. As for the console, its era has clearly ended. But some people, such as myself, choose to keep dreaming. Oh fuck, I just remembered! Did you guys really think I was gonna make a Dreamcast video and just not mention the Sonic fucking Adventure series? Oh man, those games were... If I really wanted to talk about those, I would need to go pretty far back. There's not enough context and I know I'd get carried away because, well, Sonic. I've got an idea.